episode of Luke Cage, Luke does battle with a ghost from his past, and Mariah Dillard transitions comfortably into transforming into a superpowered supervillain with her grip around Harlem's neck. The Judas bullet strikes hard in this week's episode of Luke Cage. This is definitely going to be the lowest moment for Power Man himself, because this week's episode formally introduces Willis Stryker, an old friend and confidant of Carl Lucas. That's Luke Cage. In fact, his real name is Diamondback. That's right, the man himself, the snake from the shadows, finally appears in this episode, and he's got a gun that'll bring down a god. There's two big stories going on in this week's episode of Luke Cage. The main one being that Luke is trying to evade Willis Stryker, his old friend from the past. Willis is trying to finish the job with the Judas bullet, a bullet so strong that it can actually hurt Luke Cage. While all of this is going on, you also have Mariah Dillard, who is definitely stepping up to the plate and being the next big super villainess of Harlem. And I have to say, she's pretty terrifying for how far she's willing to go at this point in the story. At first, she was completely opposed to the idea of murder. After this week's episode, we get to see that not only is she warmed up to it, but she's cool with all of the protocol behind it, covering up events and even getting patsies to take the fall for her. Mariah has definitely become Mother Mabel, despite the fact that she doesn't see that herself. Not to mention her relationship with Shades is pretty interesting. At first it kind of came across as this like nurturing kind of like parent and son kind of thing, but as it's going on, you get to see that Shades has other ulterior motives in mind. He's definitely doing a great job of not only manipulating her, but allowing himself to finally become a big boss and take over Cottonmouth's club. This was a pretty big moment for his character, and even though he is a villain, he's such a cool character, and I cannot wait to see what he's going to do next. He's always playing in the shadows like an evil puppeteer. Misty Knight also plays a pretty important role in this episode. Not only does she discover where Luke Cage and Claire is, but she ends up getting involved with a confrontation with Diamondback. In fact, I love how Diamondback actually gets formally introduced in the episode, because he's been following Luke Cage around town. He finds them when they get into this ambulance to belong to a friend of Claire. He ends up blowing the shit out of that with a grenade launcher. He finds them at this woman's clinic, and he starts to fire in their general direction, and I love that they demonstrated what happens when the Judas bullet actually just hits something. It is quite literally like a drill. Like, it just goes into something, it drills in, and then it just explodes. You get to see the damage that it actually causes to a wall. And for Luke Cage to actually survive this and even go throughout this entire episode with a giant gunshot wound in his stomach is just crazy. It is also worth mentioning that apparently Luke Cage's whole like not being able to hit by bullets or be cut by anything not only extends to his exterior but his interior as well. His inner organs, his muscles, they'll always try to repair themselves and flex themselves with awesomeness to stop the power of bullets. And that's really the only thing that's been keeping him alive this entire time. But the bullet itself inside has actually exploded and there's no way to get to the shrapnel. Luke Cage is so tough that when they actually try to do surgery on his stomach, the scalpel breaks. Not only can Claire not do it, Luke Cage tries to do the procedure on himself, but that's a no-go. This is actually a pretty big weakness for the character. His greatest strength is also his greatest weakness, depending on, of course, if you have the right weapon for the job. Through a bit of luck, Luke Cage actually manages to find Diamondback, and he ends up dragging him into this building. When they meet each other for the first time, it's a really tense moment. You can see the confusion on Luke Cage's face. And then you have Diamondback, who makes this quick escape after somehow surviving all of the beatings from Luke Cage, and he actually takes Misty Knight hostage. And it looks like he's going to execute her right in this episode, but he decides to let her go. He's basically going to try and torture Luke Cage just a little bit longer, and he's going to use Misty Knight to make that happen. However, there is one final confrontation at the end of the episode where Luke Cage and Diamondback go into this old abandoned theater, and they just brawl it out. It is awesome. I especially love because you have Diamondback, who's such a theatrical villain. I love the fact that when he first introduces himself in the episode, he starts quoting The Warriors, which, if you haven't seen that movie, check it out. It's awesome. He manages to lure Luke Cage into the actual theater, and he's actually in the top balcony, and he's just going to snipe him as soon as he walks over. Luke Cage turns around, and he tries to apologize for something that happened in their past. And apparently, all of the bad things that have happened to Luke Cage are all because of Diamondback. All of these events have been orchestrated, maybe even possibly the death of Reva, although it's still sort of up in the air if he really had anything to do with that. He basically is just trying to get in the head of Luke Cage. But as Luke is about to be shot, he runs into this pillar, which actually ends up destroying the balcony, bringing Willis down, and that's when they end up just having this badass, like, fist fight. And it's great because it really, again, demonstrates how powerful Luke Cage is. How he's able to take this, like, giant pipe which has cinder block on it and tries to hit Luke with it, but it just shatters as soon as he blocks it away. But Willis is fighting really cheap. He keeps going for his wounds, kicking him right in the gunshot wound, but eventually Luke Cage just grabs his ass and tosses him right out of the theater. It's a really great moment, but somehow he is able to escape, and at the very end of the episode, as daybreak is here, they confront each other one more time in the streets, and Stryker ends up hitting him right in the shoulder, which just happens to conveniently put him right into the back of a garbage truck. This could very well be the end of Luke Cage, but that's not going to happen. We still have a couple more episodes to go. So, what's the rundown on this week's episode of Luke Cage? This one was awesome! The introduction of Diamondback, and it was really, really effective. He's a really interesting villain in the sense we don't really know a lot about him, but we know he's really important, especially because he's just been in the background this entire time. What I will say is, aside from just all of the cool action moments from Luke Cage, which definitely hit at home, all of the stuff with Mariah Dillard is just as interesting. Her rise to power and becoming a villain is just really fun to watch. I don't know, maybe it's just kind of like watching a train wreck in slow motion. It's handled well because all the actors do a fantastic job in this series, and all of her interactions with Shades are also pretty fun to watch. I also really love the scene at the end of the episode where Misty Knight was getting really pissed off at Claire Temple, actually pinning her against the wall, just trying to get some information out of her. Claire is saying that Luke Cage is innocent, and for some odd reason, Misty Knight just doesn't want to let this stuff go. And to see these two characters go at it like that was honestly kind of shocking, and it's showing that things are really starting to break down for Misty. Like, she's been through a lot of serious shit. Ever since Luke Cage ended her life, things have never been the same. Diamondback is already more interesting than Cottonmouth ever was, if only for the fact that he's so involved with Luke Cage's past, the fact that they're brothers, not to mention just that he has these weapons and access to all of these crazy things which could actually take down superhuman people. So I can't wait to learn a little bit more about his backstory and really what his ultimate plans are going to be, if it's simply just taking over Harlem or it's something a little more elaborate than that. This is the Marvel Universe. Things are probably going to get a little crazier from here. What I will say is, this was a really great episode of Luke Cage. Definitely one of the high moments of the series. The final confrontation with Diamondback alone is what made this episode great, but all of the great things going on in the background, the other origins of other villains are just great. I freaking love it. So I'm going to give this episode right here a 5 out of 5. I really enjoyed it, and I had no complaints from the episode. Overall, this was just great entertainment. Check it out if you have Netflix, and make sure to stay tuned. There's a lot of other cool Marvel Netflix series coming out. I just saw the trailer for Iron Fist, and it looks awesome. It's not the one they showed from Comic-Con, like they just showed it today. It's awesome. You finally actually get to see Iron Fist in action. You get to see the power of his fist, the glowing and everything. And it looks like the fighting in that series is going to really take the whole Marvel, like, Netflix series to new heights, because it is mostly based around martial arts, even more so than Daredevil. So let's get excited for that. What I will say is, that's my thoughts on this week's episode of Luke Cage. Make sure to tell me what you guys thought about it in the comments section below. What did you think of the confrontation between Luke Cage and Diamondback? Please tell me in the comments section below. You guys are awesome! Thank you for watching this review, I really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave me a comment, and like the video. Thank you again for watching, and as always, stay dandy, baby!